As chairman of the and I am invoking the provisions of RSA 9182 3B. Federal, state, and local officials have determined that gatherings of 10 or more people pose a substantial risk to our community in its continuing efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19. In concurring with their determination, I also find that this meeting is imperative for the continued operation of town government and services, which are vital to public safety and confidence during this emergency. As such, this meeting will be conducted without a quorum of this body physically present in the same location. At this time, I also welcome members of the public accessing this meeting remotely and applicants before the commission. Even though this meeting is being conducted in a unique manner under unusual circumstances, the usual rules of conduct and decorum apply. Thank you for your patience. Let's get started by taking a roll call attendance of the Conservation Commissioners. When each member states their name, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting.
And I will call the names and you state that as Drew asked. So Drew, you're first.
Andrew Koff, from the chair, Conservation Commission.
Trevor. Trevor.
Trevor Matera.
Dave Short.
Dave Short, and I'm alone.
Sally Ward, and I'm alone at the moment. Bill Campbell.
Bill Campbell, and I'm alone.
Carlos
Gwendon, and I'm alone.
Allison Eberhard.
Allison Eberhard, I'm currently alone.
Nick.
Nick Campion, currently alone.
Don Clement.
Don Clement, alone in the room.
Ginny, you're muted.
Okay, Ginny Robb, and I am alone.
And I don't think Kristen is with us. Kristen's not with us tonight, Osterwood. Julie Gilman. You're muted.
Here we go. Julie Gilman, Select Board Liaison. I am alone in the room.
Kristen Murphy.
Kristen Murphy, Natural Resource Planner for the town, and I am alone in the room.
And we have guests, Dan Tinkham.
Yes, this is Dan Tinkham, and I am alone in my room.
Matt Berube.
Yep, Matt Berube, Water Sewer Manager, alone in the room.
And Michael Metcalf.
Yes, Michael Metcalf, and I am alone in the room.
I think I got everyone. And we have 7 voting members, so we don't need to ask any alternates to vote tonight.
I'm going to recuse myself, so we will ask someone.
Shall we ask Nick to be the voting alternate tonight?
Yes.
You good with that, Nick?
Nick's okay with that.
Sure.
Okay. Before we get started, I wanted to do something just slightly different for a second. I wanted to acknowledge the Indigenous people of the Exeter and the surrounding area. This area was once the domain of the Swampscott people, which was a sub-tribe of the Pennacook Nation, and they've known to inhabit this area for a long time in all of Great Bay and down into Massachusetts. And this was Exeter was an important fishing site at the falls there, and an important. Just wanted to acknowledge the role that they played in this land for generations before Exeter was a town. So, and I think Kristen Murphy might have some more information about a workshop on some of the Native people that's going to be coming up.
There is a virtual workshop on the Indigenous folk of the Piscataqua region, and I can send the information around. It actually coincides with next month's meeting, right at 7 p.m. So I don't know if they'll be providing a recording that we could view later. But
okay. Well, we can talk about that later and post it to Facebook. Before we get going, is there any public comment for any items that are not related to anything on the agenda? don't see anyone from the public on the meeting, so I guess no one is here to comment. All right, we are going to move first into our first agenda item, which is a request by the Department of Public Works for temporary drilling access on town-owned conservation lands as part of their groundwater source development and exploration efforts through several different lots. I work for the Department of Environmental Services and the Drinking Water Bureau, so I have a conflict of interest related to this project. So I'm happy to help be part of the conversation, but I will be recusing myself from voting in the discussion tonight. But I guess to start it off, I would turn it over to Matt and the team to talk about the project first, and then we can get into maybe an overview of the project or at least this phase of the project. And then we can work through some of the nitty-gritty pieces of the individual parcels and their deeds. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes, thank you. I think that's just how we planned it.
Okay.
I do have Mike Metcalf is here as the consultant engineer that's helping with this project, and Dan Tinkham is getting into the groundwater or technical aspects. So yes, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to this evening. It's been a long, about a year and a half worth of project now that we've been progressing to this state. So here we are now starting to get into some possible drilling to possibly get the sites narrowed down for potential groundwater exploration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to give you a little bit more of an overview where we're at with the project, and then Dan will proceed into talking about the sites. Thank you.
Everybody, and thank you for having us. I'm Mike Metcalf. I'm a senior project manager with Underwood Engineers, and we were teamed with Emery and Garrett Groundwater on this project for the town of Exeter, and Emery and Garrett Groundwater is represented by Dan, and they're a division of GZA, which is why you see the GZA on Dan's shirt. So the reason we were teamed is we are doing the engineering aspects of this project, which was a groundwater and surface water assessment for the town of Exeter. And EGGI, Emery and Garrett, is doing all the hydrogeological aspects of this. So what we were tasked with was looking at all of Exeter's existing supplies, the surface supplies, the groundwater supplies, and assessing where they were at and looking out into the future. What are you going to need for water demand, and what are the best supplies going forward? And there's a lot to this and a lot of moving parts, and I don't want to get into too much detail here, but essentially where we are at on this is we've recommended that you continue with the integrated management approach, which the consulting engineering firm that started with us, before us on this project was directing the town towards, and the town has adopted that approach, which really involves using all of your supplies, your surface supplies and your groundwater supplies. And as we look at everything, you've got a pretty aging, tired water treatment plant that's in a flood-prone location. It definitely needs to be upgraded if it's going to continue. You have 3 surface supplies, a couple of which we have found through this process do not have the sustainable capacity that was originally thought, so that they aren't going to supply as much groundwater over the long term as was originally thought. And where we see this going is the town is going to need both groundwater and surface water supplies into the future. But with this less capacity of the existing supplies and the capacity of the groundwater treatment plant on Larry Lane that you have already constructed and therefore have treatment capacity available, and also since groundwater is definitely a cheaper thing to operate than a surface water treatment plant, our recommendation is to move ahead with developing more groundwater supplies and try to do that to lessen the amount of surface water treatment plant that eventually will have to be built. So as we looked at this, we kind of put the brakes, or asked the town to put the brakes on the surface water plant, saying, let's get that along for another number of years while we look for additional groundwater supplies and hopefully reduce the amount of surface water that we will need to use. Dan will get into what they've done, but they did a town-wide search for both sand and gravel and bedrock aquifer supplies and identified groundwater development zones. And whenever you do this, you tend to look at town-owned properties because you don't have to buy them. And a number of the favorable places are on conservation properties, which is why we're here tonight. And, you know, I'm not sure how you all feel. What we think is that it's sort of a win-win situation if you can put a groundwater supply on conserved property, because nothing can be done after that. It's a wellhead protection area, so it's a good protected use of the property, and that's kind of the way we're proceeding. So the object is to do this groundwater exploration and see if we can find additional supplies, and if we bring those online, that reduces the amount of surface water treatment we'll need in the future. So that's why we're here before you tonight. I don't know if there's any questions or comments on that before I turn it over to Dan, who will really get into the meat of the matter of these properties and the access that we are looking for. And if I don't see any questions, then I guess...
I did have a question about, could you differentiate for us the potential impact of the exploration versus the ultimate, if you found a site that was appropriate, what would that impact be? So how do we differentiate those two questions?
You want to differentiate between the exploration and then the final construction of something?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a good question. The exploration is definitely less invasive and would use a track-mounted rig, and Dan can get into that. You need to get enough of a path in there to be able to do that work. You know, that may involve, depending on where you are, cutting trees to get into a certain location, but it's pretty non-invasive for the exploratory work. If you find a source, then you are going to be buildings, you have to have access to that. So you'd have to have an access road. Depending on where it is, you will have some sort of building, a pump station. It can, you know, and again, I've seen, you know, where this has been a sensitive nature, and these things can be below ground, they can be hidden. You know, there are options for those sort of things. But yes, there would be construction which would involve equipment to go out and install the well, and, you know, access to that point, wherever that is, and some sort of pumping station facility to pump that water if it needs to be treated to the groundwater treatment plant on Larry Lane. If it doesn't need to be treated, other than corrosion control and disinfection, which are the two basics that have to be done for any groundwater supply, then it could just be put directly into the system. But yes, more work.
So if you found with the initial exploration a site or sites that would be appropriate, would you then come back to conservation and talk about what would be next?
I imagine that would be the approach. I mean, we haven't really discussed that. I see Matt nodding. So, yeah, I think if we you know, went to one of these locations that we'll be talking about and felt it was a home run, that it was a good groundwater supply for the town, then I think, I'm not sure of the process, but I assume since it's Conservation Commission land over which you have authority, we would need to come back to you.
Ginny has a question.
Actually, I do. What's the difference between groundwater and surface water? Is it depth or? So
surface water, so just to give a quick description, the surface water supplies that you have now are the Exeter River and the Exeter Reservoir. So water exposed to the atmosphere, flowing over the ground or in a pond or in a river, whereas groundwater is depth. That is water within the ground, within an aquifer that could be a sand and gravel aquifer, which is where we're looking first, or it could be a bedrock aquifer. So I don't know if any of you are not on the system and have your own private wells. Those generally are bedrock wells, drilled, hundreds of feet deep. And those are also used for municipal supplies. And we have identified, some bedrock targets if the sand and gravel targets don't work out. Generally, sand and gravel targets are less expensive to develop and usually have more yield. So those are usually the first choice.
Okay, that's fine. Guess it.
And I will just wait and answer any other questions, or Dan, you take it over whenever it seems appropriate.
Yeah, I'm happy to be interrupted. So if you have any questions along the way, just throw them out. Those are good questions, and I can expand on a couple of them as I go through this. Thank you all for listening to us tonight. I am a hydrogeologist with Emery and Garrett Groundwater and the project manager on this particular project, working with Mike and the rest of Underwood Engineering. So we're currently in phase 3 of our exploration program, and I think it's easier to describe this as an exploration program. The development is not there yet. Right now we conducted a town-wide assessment of all the properties in town, looking for the most favorable geologic areas, largely on paper and in geologic field mapping and things like that. In phase 2, we actually looked at specific areas of town that we thought were of the greatest interest for groundwater supply work, and we did site-specific geophysical surveys, and we did those surveys on some of these properties. And those kind of give us a glimpse into the subsurface, because of course we can't see what's down into the aquifers. And the geophysical surveys look at the electrical resistivity of the subsurface and maybe the seismic velocity in some cases, the magnetic field of the earth, and we try to pull out anomalous features of those different types of surveys to help us identify areas that may or may not contain water-bearing deposits. So that's what phase 2 was. Now the proof is in the pudding. We have to come out in phase 3, and we actually have to drill a hole. We're all two-dimensional at this point, and we need to actually go down into the earth and find out what is there. We've predicted what is there. I've hypothesized the geologic deposits I anticipate, and now it's time to actually do it and see if I'm right or wrong. And as we go through the exploration process, exploratory test well drilling is just one more piece of data. So I drill one well, I find the results that agrees or doesn't agree with my hypothesis, and we keep changing our direction as we get more and more data in from the subsurface. So that's the process we're in right now. So in unconsolidated aquifers, which is basically anything that's porous, is the dirt all the way down to the solid bedrock. That's what we're looking at right now with this type of exploration. I'll talk a little bit about bedrock test-well drilling later, but the primary interest is the unconsolidated aquifers. I don't know if, Kristen, did they get a picture of the rig, or should I try to share one? Or
I did not send the picture of the equipment, so yeah, you should have sharing ability.
See if I can share this. Over here. You all see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. This is the typical rig. In fact, this might be the very rig we're using. It's about 8 feet wide, probably, and maybe 15 feet long, about the size of a car. It's got track mounted, so we can access remote locations easily without having to build roads and things like that. The treads are kind of extra wide, so they can go through areas like, wet areas that are without causing deep rutting and things like that. So they're designed to be off-road and get us to the places we need to go to do the work we have to do. And like I said, this type of rig is only used in the unconsolidated sand and gravel. Once you get down to the bedrock, that's an entirely different type of drilling process and requires much larger equipment. So just wanted to give you a sense for that, what type of rig we're actually looking at. So when this rig gets mobilized, we drop it off in a big trailer, it goes out onto a site, and then there'll most likely be another rig that goes alongside it. We call it a water buggy. It's just a support rig that carries materials and water back and forth to the drill site, so the drill rig can keep going. So there's two vehicles that we'll be talking about in most of my discussions. One goes in and out a lot because it has to, usually with rubber tracks, so it's less, it's easier on the soil, and the rig itself stays in place. We let it do the work that it's meant to do. With that, I think I'm ready to move on to the actual zones. I can go through the 3 zones we've selected. Most of it's going to be what we call Zone 1 off Drinkwater Road. Is there any questions about the process of drilling before I talk about specific lots?
Yeah, I'm curious as to how many perforations at a site was the number that was in what was reported. Is that the actual number of drill holes per that site? Or do you have to do many of them?
Well, every site's a little different, but the one particular conservation parcel, which is 107-10 off Drinkwater Road, there's 5 drilling targets on that site that we would propose going in there and drilling up to 5. Okay. Unlikely we drill any different sites. We'd probably limit ourselves to those 5.
Okay, but that's the actual number then of drill holes there would be at each site. Okay.
Could be fewer, because if we drill 3 and they don't work out, or we kind of change our minds on what we think's down there, then we may decide not to drill in that particular location and move to a different site. But it should be lower than that number.
And Dan, you might want to just describe the type of well. Is it a 2-inch well, 2-inch diameter well? You want to just describe what'll be there afterwards?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, after we penetrate the entire thickness and we decide where we want to put a well, we actually build in this case it'll be 3-inch diameter PVC wells with a slotted screen. So we'll choose a screen interval, say 120 to 130 feet. We'll install PVC screen and then riser all the way up to the surface from 130 feet in that case. And that hole that we created, the boring itself, is being held open by steel casing, which is pounded into the ground. Then you put the PVC well inside that, and then you retract the steel casing from around that. You let the formation fill in around the well, and then you slowly pull it up. And on the way back up the hole, you may put a filter pack sand in outside your screen. We will put a bentonite plug in to maintain any natural seals that are in the ground now. We don't want to create holes through it. So there'll be a natural, or there'll be an unnatural bentonite seal placed to make sure that we maintain the confined nature of the aquifer. And then at the very top, the PVC well will usually stick up about 2.5 feet above ground. And then a 4-inch diameter protective casing will be placed around that. That'll just be a locking steel pipe, basically, which just protects it and keeps out people who are too curious from our equipment. And then after the drilling is done, of course, now we have a well into the aquifer. We can go out with a test pump. We clean up the well through a process called development, and then we put a test pump in and actually pump it and sample the water and see what the quality is, and do a preliminary yield test on the formation to see if we're been successful. If no water comes out, then that didn't help us any. Generally, we have a lot of water coming out of these things. That's the drilling process in a nutshell. The first zone probably to talk about and probably requires the most discussion is
Chairman.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I have my hand up. I thought I had my hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Good. Thank you for the description. So, how long does it generally take to test a well site out? A day, 2 days, a week?
Yeah, most of these each target will probably take 2 to 3 days, I would say, to drill, because they happen to be very deep in this first zone. Some zones it's a one day process. You're in, you're out very quickly. These are going to be pretty deep, so I suspect it's going to be 2 to 3 days, and then afterwards another day of development and testing. So over basically a 2 or 3 week period, we do all of these wells.
So after you do the exploration and you go through the process that you just described, you leave the site and you're going to go test out other sites. If that site isn't a site that's determined to be one that will be the well site, what happens to that area around the drill hole that you've disturbed? Does it stay there like you've left it, or does it get restored?
The only besides running over some trees, small shrubbery and things, what's left at the site itself is a small pile of dirt that we brought up the hole. So it'll be less than a yard of material that generally is raked out around the well. And then
okay, so you're not leaving any materials behind.
No, okay. not on the ground. No, it all gets spread out and is quickly covered up next growing season. But the well itself, at that point, the town would have to make a decision. Do we leave the well in place for a long time? Right now, there are wells in town that were put in the early '80s, and they gave people like me a window into what the aquifer is like now, because we have.
Yeah, I'm taking step by step. First step I want to talk about is the exploration.
Yep.
That's where my focus is tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So, Don, just to clarify, there will be a wellhead left there.
Even if we decide not to utilize that as a well.
That's correct. When we'd have to just say, it's what Dan's saying. We'd have to decide as a town whether that gets yanked or we leave it for continued use, just as the ones from the 80s have been now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
In our final report, we'd recommend, we think you should keep this well. We think you can get rid of this well. And there's procedures at DES, specifically addressing how to close a well to make sure it protects the environment too. So zone SG1, we call it Sand and Gravel 1, and this is east of Drinkwater Road and primarily west of the cove, with large wetland that kind of bisects that whole area out there.
Do we want to share a screen, or does everyone have it up? The figure 11A, I believe, is the figure we should be looking at.
Yeah, I have it right here. So. Are you seeing the map now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Different screen. Yeah, so you can see where you are. Drinkwater Road's on the west, on the left-hand side of this figure, heading north-south. Phillips Exeter Academy land is all on the west side of the road, and then you can see the individual house lots. And if you're familiar with Drinkwater Road, as you head south on your left, there's a fire pond with a dry hydrant, and that's right where town map 93-11. That's the conservation land that the town owns that is right up against Drinkwater Road. There's no other access into the other parcels except from Drinkwater Road in that narrow area there, most of which is filled up with the fire pond.
Yeah, Dan, we often call this the Smith page.
Okay.
We refer to this as Smith page.
Okay. Yeah, Smith. So where our targets are all on lot 107-10. You can see the large middle lot. And on the far right-hand side, you can see the other lot is the Exeter Falls Conservation Area, which you have another name for, I know. So the bottom line is the blue and yellow targets that you see out there. There's 5 of them on lot 10710. And those are the test well targets that we would like to go after. You can see the prime wetlands are delineated on the map, kind of faded in the background. So the large one to the right is the cove, kind of bisecting the entire area. And then there's 2 other limbs down in the lower left on what we call the Salima parcel, 107.3. And those both kind of truncate the Salima parcel into sections. So where we want to drill our primary targets right now are out on the town conservation land, 10710. So access, you're probably all familiar with the trail that's out there. There's a nice, beautiful loop trail that goes through that parcel, which meets Drinkwater Road just to the north side of that pond. So the only access for a drill rig to get back into that area on town property is down that trail. And once we're 100 feet off the road, it's fairly open, and a drill rig could go in there without having to move trees. But the first 80 feet to 100 feet, if you're all familiar with it, there's fairly closely spaced trees, and the town property is not that wide. So it would require some amount of tree clearing to get an 8-foot wide rig to squeeze through. It would be a minimal amount of cutting, but we definitely would have to remove some trees in order to get in the first, I would say just really it's about 100 feet. And once you're in there, it opens up. But, probably the entire property, we can move the rig around any larger trees and get out to the targets themselves. Of course, there's a concern with wetlands, as I've heard talk about vernal pools and other such areas out in these lots. And I actually went out there and visited with a certified wetland scientist, and we think we can pretty safely access all these targets by staying on high ground. It's going to take some kind of creative route finding to stay up on the high ground and avoid all these low areas. But we should be able to do that without risking any entry into any kind of wetlands areas.
Dan, if you found a well in there, one of those 5 that really was good, would you have to then access that well the same way? Is there enough room even you'd have to, the whole distance between the pond and the border of the property would have to be paved or whatever, gravel, would have to be a road all the way.
Yeah, it'd have to be a single lane road, yeah.
It's pretty narrow.
It is. There's definitely a narrow access point. I agree with you there. I think it's doable. I think there's enough land there to make a single track road, but that would definitely have to be expanded. Because if this test well drilling phase was successful and we wanted to put a production well in, we'd come back to you and have discussions with the town. First, the town has to decide, do we really want to supply out there? Maybe we find 3 good places in town, and then the town has to sit down and say, okay, we like this one versus this one. What's it going to cost to get the water from that site out to the system? And things like the access road and how much it would cost are all part of that equation. That'll be thrown back to Mike and the engineers to figure out, okay, what is the best way to get this water to the system most effectively and allow permanent access to the site. Right now, we just have to get in there and see if it's there. Otherwise, it's a moot point. The wetland scientist that I've been talking to about this site, believes we can do this with the state's simple notification process, and have the wetland people go out, look at the roads that we're putting in, and then you would be notified through that notification process that we're into the site. Before we even get there, though, it would be a matter of the cutting of the trees from Drinkwater Road back to the edge of back to the west end of that pond. And I don't know actually.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Would you have to cross the wetland, the prime wetland, to get to those sites that are in the upper part of the lot, or would you come in a different way from the road over off Hampton Road?
Right. That's exactly. Yeah. If we were going over to the target on the east side of the cove, we would come off the Exeter Falls Road, that subdivision. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's no easy way to come off that cul-de-sac, but at the very end of that cul-de-sac, there's an access way that we can cut through the woods and cross the transmission lines and get out to that parcel. That's not a high priority right now. Right now, we're worried more about the westernmost targets. They have the most favorability and show the greatest promise for depth of the aquifer. So, good question. And the other targets you see way up on the north end of Zone 1, we call that the SG1 North Zone. Those are all on private property. So we'll be talking to the landowners about these parcels. As is the Salima parcel to the south of your land. So right now we're just talking about those 5 wells west of the east of Drinkwater. I don't know if there's any local requirements or permits that would be necessary, but we think the state's simple notification process would be adequate in terms of protecting the wetlands. So we'll ask you for advice on that if they're.
Well, I don't know if this is the time to talk about the deed This may be on, I think it's page 9 of the packet. It may be Kristen Murphy. I'll hand this over to you.
Okay. Do you want me to share the packet, or does everyone have that in front of them? What I sent out to you, in addition to the materials that was provided by Public Works, was a list of the deeds for the specific properties, their description of what drilling entailed, and then kind of a spreadsheet that walked through some of the key components of the different deeds. And so since the deeds are so different for all the different parcels that we're talking about tonight, I think it makes sense to address them one by one. So I would be happy to share my screen if you want to look at that, or you could just refer to your own computer to view that table.
Why don't we just do that? Dan's already sharing the screen, so we can just leave the figure up, which I think is more helpful. If you just want to describe the deed in the table for folks.
Yep, so let me pull it up so I have it in front of me as well. So Smith Page, that's the western portion of the portion that's west of the cove. There's 2 deeds that apply to that property. I put the label on the top, and they both were acquired through Land Water Conservation Fund. So the table I provided, I tried to just kind of highlight some of the key points, but obviously there's quite a bit more terms that are identified in the deed. So I hope you had time to go through the deeds. So ownership for Smith Page, it was deeded to the town to be managed and controlled by the Conservation Commission. Page is the drink water portion of the parcel was granted to the Conservation Commission. And it did not appear as though there was quite a bit of conflict there. The only item that I felt was that I was a little unsure of in how to advise you was there is a clause in there that says this property cannot be converted to a use other than outdoor recreation without written approval from the Secretary of Interior. And that's of the Federal Secretary of Interior. We provide annual reports to DRED, the state agency, and Eric Feldbaum is our point of contact. So I'm not sure if the consulting firm or Matt, if you guys have contacted them or if there's been any feedback there, or if your expectation was that we would do that. I guess it's
basically waiting for tonight's meeting, I think, to see what the flavor of things were and how we should proceed.
Okay. So I won't read through the rest of the terms of the deed. You had them, since last Friday. Hopefully, had a chance to look at them. So I guess I don't really have any additional information than that.
I think one thing I'd like to add is that the outdoor recreation component certainly could continue. I believe for any kind of walking access, the same access that's there now would certainly be allowed if the well was in there for long term. Andrew could shed more light on that if he needs to.
Yeah, this wouldn't preclude access by the public to have a well at the site.
That's a really favorable thing for us. It gives a local interest and kind of a watchdog sort of effect. People want to take care of it, and that's what we want to make sure the well and protection areas are protected. And so it makes, to me, it's a very compatible land use to have outdoor recreation around the well.
Are there other comments for Dan or questions?
I just have one observation. I was out there fairly recently in the fall, And I know that entrance, that narrow entrance has quite a few invasives in it, including knotweed, which I just got back. Potentially that would get transported to the interior. The interior of that piece is actually fairly invasive free from the areas I've walked. So to go through in that way frequently would become an issue, possibly especially with equipment, transporting seed or branches or roots that would go back into that property.
I would have to check with some experts. I assume there's some best management practices we could get to do that. In the winter time, I would think would be the best time to do that. But I'm not an expert in that end. So
on impact in general, that's probably the lowest impact time. But there probably are seed in the ground right on the side of the road. On the side of the road is where the big concern for me would be the Japanese knotweed, which is not in the back of that property, but is right on that entrance in the road.
Is there anyone else? Any other comments?
So Sally here, I guess I'm a little confused about if the deed says no other use besides outdoor recreation without permission. What does that mean for us? Does it mean that the next step would be to get permission? Or is there some alternative way around that? Of course, the deed was written without necessarily anticipating what's being proposed. But how does that jibe with what the deed says? And I feel like, the deed is the deed. How do we deal with what's specified in the deed? Kristen, can you address that at all? Or do you see what my question or my concern is?
Yeah, I mean, the role of the Conservation Commission is to interpret and uphold the terms of the deed. And so I understand what you're saying. It says the property herein described has been acquired with federal land and water conservation fund assistance under New Hampshire project number blah, 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 and cannot be converted to other than public outdoor recreation use without the written approval of the Secretary of Interior. So your question is, does still allowing recreation use continue to meet that term?
Yeah, so it's not, if this were to go forward, we wouldn't be converting it. It would be a supplementary activity, but it's not converting the parcel to non-outdoor public activity. I guess that's the way I would look at it. Is that an accurate read? Is that an accurate interpretation? Do you think?
I think deeds are challenging to interpret. So as long as you're meeting the intent, I mean, I think a very important due diligence step would be to contact at least Eric Feldbaum and to determine if this is in compliance with their view of the terms of the deed, because this particular project was acquired using these federal funds. And so the deed is the communication tool that we have to continue to comply with those terms.
So it seems like that's what we should do. Contact the person that you just referred to, in my opinion.
Are there other comments?
No, go ahead. So perhaps it would be helpful to know, should DRED be supportive of or interpret this to be in compliance with the deed? Is the commission supportive under those terms of allowing the exploration stage of this project? And if you are, there is a draft motion in your packet to that effect. you could just add the condition that, that DRED and or the Secretary of Interior has signed off on this exploration stage.
Well, aren't there two other sites to look at also? I know, but Dan, are we looking or are we looking at activating all three of these sites?
So I would address, you're talking about all the other properties. I would address each parcel by its deed and make a motion that way, just so that it's clear, because the deeds are different from property to property. So this first one would just be those parcels within the Smith Page property. So I don't know if I can. So these guys. Can you see that?
And the parcels within the Smith Page are under one deed?
They're under both the Smith deed and the Page deed, but they both contain that clause.
Okay.
So it's up to us to ask, decide whether we want to go to DRED, or is it up to the drill people to go to DRED and see if they'll allow a well on this property?
I would say it would be in the town's best interest to ensure that DRED is on board with this. What you need to decide is, would it be compliant with the other portions of the other terms in the deed? If you feel it's compliant with that, and that's the part that if DRED's okay with it, you're okay with it, I would make a motion to that effect.
Well, again, do we need all three sites?
I think we're just talking about Smith Page at the moment.
Yeah. Well, my point is that if they can use one of the other sites, this is one that I feel is very sensitive. You've got a prime wetland in there. You've got very limited access. And if they could get away with not using it, it would be my feeling. If it turns out it's the only one that'll work for the town, maybe we've got to do it. But I need to have my arm twisted a little bit.
I agree with Bill. I think I'd rather talk through each site and get a more holistic picture of the proposal, and then we'll go back and, make our motions per parcel. But I think it would be helpful for me at least to talk through each of them.
I agree with you, Allison. I like that approach better. And we can evaluate the half a dozen sites, and then we can then make decisions based on that. It's a good point.
Okay, that sounds good. I believe, Dan, too, you may want to chime in regarding your priorities in terms of sites. I do believe, Dan, you said earlier that you were thinking that this was some of your higher priority sites.
Yeah, exactly.
Page. But if you want to talk about, maybe we talk about the next set, and you can also discuss your priorities in terms of how you want to proceed with, how you would like to proceed with this, or how you're proposing to proceed with the drilling.
Right. Absolutely. I'll put my geologist hat on since it's my love, but this site does hold the greatest promise for new water supply wells in Exeter, simply because it is very deep. There's a confining aquifer here. I'll give you a brief geologic history. Essentially, this was shallow ocean water 15,000 years ago, laid down. So when the ice receded, it laid out a lot of sand and gravel deep into what was a very large depression in the whole southwestern end of Exeter. And those really nice permeable deposits were laid down beneath this, or at the bottom, let's say. And then afterwards, it became quiet ocean water in this thick sequence of glacial clay, what they call the Presumpscot silt and clay, mantled this entire aquifer with up to 100 feet thick of blue sticky clay. And so that creates what we call a confined aquifer. This aquifer is very productive, where it's been drilled into in other places, like the existing wells in town over at Stadium, Gilman, and Larry Lane are all in the same confined aquifer system. And we know there's a kind of a widespread aquifer because we see widespread influences from those wells even in this area. But we know it's a productive aquifer. We have great depth. And depth is really important to an exploration geologist because we need drawdown in the wells. We have to be able to draw a well down by pumping it, basically to create a hole in the ground where water flows into it to supply your recharge. So that's why this is the most favorable area in town for us from a geologic standpoint. But I can go and talk about our other zones, 2 and 4, and describe the environment there and take it through each of them like you want. It sounds like a good idea at this point.
One last question, Dan.
Yeah, sure.
When you drill that and you say you get a hole down there and you fill it with water, does that change the levels of the surface water? And I'm thinking, I've heard, anyway, I've been told, I don't know geologically if it's true, that wetland, half of it drains up to the Exeter River and half of it goes down to the Taylor River, that somewhere in there's a divide. And does that get disturbed if we drill a hole underneath and hope it fills with water?
Yeah, sure. Good question. I don't believe so, simply because of the thick clay units there. That's the good thing about a confined aquifer. The bad thing is that the impacts go out great distances and lets you capture recharge from a great area. But it also it protects you from above. So the wetlands that are sitting on top of this clay, there's really no way to directly impact those wetlands from pumping below the clay because there's a big thick cap of impermeable material. You could draw water from around the edges. It's possible there's an impact, but that all comes out into the groundwater development regulations that Andrew's department at DES is involved in, where I have to show if I pump a well out here in the deep formation, I have to monitor water levels in the wetland and the shallow formation and prove that I don't have a connection to make sure I'm not having an impact on those wetlands. And if the clay wasn't there, I'd be much more concerned. And I have pumped wells where I see wetlands impacted, and I've seen them where they don't become impacted. In this case, they seem very well protected just because I have 100 feet of clay on top of me. It's really hard to get any water through it. Very good question, but geologically, it's a good thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Should I move on to zone 2? Okay, I'll stop sharing this figure. If I can get another one. Bouncing all over different screens here. Okay, you should see a map, figure 12A, which is in our report. So this is our zone SG2 and BD3. It happened to be a hybrid zone, bedrock and sand and gravel. And this will be a quick one because you don't have to do a lot on this one. We did, the blue lines you see there are geophysical surveys. They're all electrical resistivity surveys that we did on both conservation land and private property. And the only unconsolidated drilling well target out here is on the Riverwoods parcel, which is north of the Exeter River and east of the actual Riverwoods facility, their campus there. Access has been pretty limited to that parcel in recent weeks for obvious reasons, but we do hope to be able to drill the target in the far upper right corner. But that's not town conservation. It's owned by Riverwoods and the Southeast Land Trust. I understand it owns the easement on that. I think that's the right terminology. So they will be contacted. We'll be contacting Riverwoods and getting their permission so that we can start talking with Southeast Land Trust about that target. The other 2 targets you see is a one on parcel 102-4. That's a private property. And right now, that's a bedrock test well target. And so is the one down the stone parcel, the conservation land south of Powder Mill Road. Powder House Road. Anyway, it's at the far end of that field. as you're looking at it from Probably Mill Road. The biggest problem with that, which you all probably realize, is that it's pretty wet out there, and more wet in recent weeks with beaver activity on the property to the south. Like I said, that's a bedrock test well target, and that would require an entirely different type of drill rig with a kind of a beefier road, because it's a much heavier rig and support vehicles. So I'm going to reserve that for a later date and probably come back to you when we talk about bedrock test well drilling, if we want to move forward with the bedrock test well. So right now, for tonight, the only target here is under the jurisdiction of the Southeast Land Trust and Riverwoods themselves. So if you have any questions out here, I'll move on to Zone 4. Okay. Stop sharing that one. Okay, so this should be the last zone. This is our sand gravel 4 zone, and you'll recognize this between Court Street and Linden Street on the north side of the Exeter River. And the 2 parcels we're interested in are the Riverbend Circle parcel. You can see we have a single target there, and the white parcel, which is the field that gets mowed down along the river. Lower area out there. To get to both of those parcels, we do have to cross the Perry property, which is the actual conservation parcel bordering on Court Street. So we would propose pulling the rig along the side of the road there, just north of the Exeter River crossing of Court Street. There's that pull off, and that's where the rig would be offloaded, and it would track in across the Perry property, basically following an existing trail. Until we came out to the field, and then go to those 2 targets on the white parcel. And then probably after those, we'd move north and get on to the Riverbend Circle parcel, which is, that's in the woods probably 80 or 100 feet or so. The woods are fairly open there, so I think getting there is fairly simple without maybe taking down a couple small shrubs and trees. Well, the question out here, this is an interesting area. It's not too far from the Larry Lane production well, which, just up Court Street a little ways. This is an area where I'm hypothesizing anyway, there was an old delta that built out into the ocean, so there might be some sand and gravel that was being deposited by the Exeter River into the shallow ocean in this area. And so we're hoping to intercept those targets. The geophysical surveys suggest that it's not that deep. So the thickest portions of this area, in terms of unconsolidated thickness of the materials, are on the east side. So that's why all the targets are on the east. You see we have a lot of geophysical lines off on the McDonald parcel to the west. All those we believe are just too shallow, and they don't warrant test well drilling. And so that's what the geophysical surveys allow us to do. It really kind of targets us to a specific area of the town of our site. We do have a requirement for a 400-foot setback too. That's why you don't see anything around the edges of these parcels. I have to stay at least 400 feet from the boundaries for most large bottom withdrawals in the state. So that's under consideration. So in this particular case, we'd offload on Perry, track across right on the trail, and get at those 2 sites. I think there'll be minimal disturbance here. The wetlands people I went out with basically thought we could stay out of the low spots. Out in the field especially, there's some old overflow channels from the Exeter River that you can pretty easily drive around. You just kind of make a circuitous pattern on the high spots to get to these 2 targets and avoid just 2 or 3 low areas that are, have shallow water table. The river's not too far below us here. That's the other zone 4.
Mr. Chairman.
Don.
Thank you. There are 3. Are these all these bedrock or these sand and gravel?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, these are all sand and gravel.
Sand and gravel. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So they're shallow.
Yeah, they're fairly shallow. 50 to 60 feet deep, probably 70 somewhere in there. I have some extreme concerns about any work being done on Willie's
Willie White's Meadow. That's a very, very fragile piece. It's it has an very high ecological value. It's ecologically fragile. You're talking about drilling very close to the river. I don't know how stable it's going to be. As a meadow, it's always been, even when Willie worked it as a meadow, he worked it with, he brought animals. He used animals to bring in his equipment. He didn't bring in heavy equipment. I just think any kind of, even exploration there is going to be very detrimental to that meadow. And it's going to suffer greatly from exploration and from a well. If we have wind up putting a well there, I think that's going to be an enormous atrocity, to be honest with you. I think further up, I guess while we're moving further north, the river bend, we're further away from the river. We are a little higher elevation, so I think the potential environmental damage there is going to be less. Again, I don't know, but I would be very concerned about doing any kind of work in that meadow. That is really a fragile piece. It's very unique. It's going to flood a lot. So putting a wellhead in there is going to be subject to a lot of flooding. To get to it, you're going to be disturbing with that equipment. I'm just very concerned of granting permission to do any kind of work in the meadow. So Willie's Meadow. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
I got to address the flooding issue anyway. We do, if there ever was a permanent well put out there, it would have to be above a certain floodplain level. BS requires that. So it would be built up basically around the wellhead itself to protect it from floodway damage. Certainly in the floodway. In terms of damage to the soil, the wetland scientists thought if we stayed up on the high spots with a wide track vehicle, we'd probably be okay. And we're proposing to do it in the winter. I think it would cause minimal damage at that time frame. I understand the concern. Any other questions? I don't know if you want to talk about the deeds on these parcels.
Yeah, I think that's good. Kristen, do you want to go over the deeds?
So the Perry property, which you would cross initially when you leave Court Street, is just a tax deeded parcel. There's no restrictions on there. It's managed as conservation land, but there are no deed restrictions, I should say. Riverbend, that's the northern the proposed drill site. That deed states that it was deeded to the town for use as conservation land. It's designated, some of the terms talk about it, it's designated for use as conservation land in open area and not for residential or commercial use. And then White's Meadow was designated to the town. Some key deed terms are no hunting or motorized public access, but the town can use motorized equipment as necessary to maintain the wet meadow. And there is an obligation to keep and maintain the area as a meadow, and that's why that's one of our annual obligations. That White's Meadow was purchased with the 2003 conservation bond, and all of the sites listed are within that open area. Shall we go to the next one, or did you have questions about the deed?
Any discussion?
I take it from that then, Kristen, if we can give the blessing to this, to drilling on these lands without conferring with any other body. does the select board have to approve drilling on these lands? I mean, do we make a recommendation to them, or do we just say, well, yeah, that's all right, we'll go ahead and drill?
A good question, Matt. I know you have, I believe did you present to the select board, or were you scheduled to? Let's check my screen.
No, I have not planned on doing that, no.
Okay. I mean, typically you make.
I'm sure, I have the process as we went through this. I put the brakes on and we started going through the steps. Here we are trying to just I think this is just our first step. And if I need to make a recommendation to the selectmen through the town manager, then I will do so. I'm sure Julie might know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe we could defer to the town manager, but the Conservation Commission does make decisions over uses on conservation land without the select board's involvement. This is a little bit different, but I know the select board is aware of the exploration project. So, and Matt, I believe they're aware that that conservation land is one of the potential areas being explored. They might not be aware of the individual sites. Is that accurate?
Yes, I will say that we do know that this is going on.
Okay, thanks, Julie. All right, so I mean, I guess my thought is I would state your motion the way I drafted it, and that if it's determined that the town manager or select board need to also weigh in, your motion would still suffice. Your role is simply interpreting the terms of the deed. So I would just use the motion that I crafted, I guess.
I have a question about the overall strategy here in the sequencing. So is it the intention that you would do this exploration for all of these zones, or would you do it in order that you've presented it and not continue if you didn't need to? So if you did drilling in zone 1 and found something that would be appropriate and adequate, would you call off the other drilling, or are you going to do this simultaneously? I'm a little confused about that.
Sure. Yeah, I can describe that. The intent is to drill all the targets, just so that we can make the most intelligent decision on how to move forward. Because it's so much easier for the town, and as I referred to earlier, the engineers are going to have to step in and say, okay, this water has a certain quality. You may or may not have to treat it. This one's this far from the distribution system. It's going to cost so much to get the pipe there. So from an exploration standpoint, the more targets we have, I can say, oh, this site's good for 200 gallons a minute. This one's good for 400. Then the engineers can put a cost comparison together on what's it going to cost to use that water per gallon, and then offer the town the best solution. So
I see.
The more alternatives we have, the better decision in the long run. So our intent is to drill all the zones we can on private and public land, and then offer that, in a matrix form through the engineers to say, okay, this is the most cost-effective water right here on this parcel, and that looks great, but it's less cost-effective to go over here. And there's no way to do that unless we drill all the targets.
And I would, that's we're waiting for that information in order to be able to work on that with the town. So we've done preliminary cost estimates on each supply, on each groundwater development zone, and then tried to what we call normalize those to say essentially a cost per gallon delivered, but we don't know the gallons delivered. And even with the test wells, you make your best guess. But right now we don't have, a good idea. And part of our task is to do exactly what Dan said. Take the information that they're going to give to us so that then we can do the number crunching. How much water main? Does it need treatment? Does it need to go to the Larry Lane treatment plant? How much of an access road? All those pieces and parts, so that we can develop intelligent cost estimates to present to Matt and DPW and make a recommendation on what we think the best path forward is for additional groundwater supplies.
Do you have a goal for how much water we need additional, or is it really not just a function of total gallons, but gallons versus expense of getting it there?
There is a goal, which I don't have right in front of me, but what we went through and looked at the demands projected out 20 years or so. And I will say we spent quite a bit of time and effort on that, because that's been done in the past and it's been overestimated. So the town was sensitive to that. And, we've done our best to estimate future demand based on development that could happen in the town, and how much you're using now and how much your existing supplies can supply, so that we do know that we need additional supply to meet demand as we go further into the future. And I have a target number in my file. I just don't remember what it is, Bill, off the top of my head.
So if I could recap what I've heard so far, there were concerns about the Zone 1, the first parcel that we discussed, the Smith Page, that had to do with the deed and whether or not, and sorry, there's background. So the notion that we needed to get DRED's weigh in on it. And then the other concerns were the concern about the, which Don had raised, about the conservation concerns about the meadow in the here close to the Exeter River, and that was the only conservation concern that I heard. Was there something else?
We had some of us, I think, had a conservation concern on the first parcel about getting in with the size of that opening there, and invasives too.
Oh, invasives too, correct. So do we want to have a motion for each of the parcels then?
I would recommend.
It sounded like, Kristen, that's what you were recommending, right?
Yes, it looks like Ginny has her hand up as well.
Ginny?
I just wanted to clarify something. Would you drill these wells, explore these wells, and then cap it to be called upon for future use? Or would you just go ahead and put these into use? I don't want to say right away, but they wouldn't be reserved for future use?
It's certainly possible to reserve them, depending on where we find the water. And there may be a particular place where it makes the most sense to put a production well in, because of the engineering analysis, I'll call it. And you develop that water now with the intent, maybe 10 years down the road, you want to develop another supply that we identified, but didn't want to spend the money right now to develop. So you certainly could maintain those monitoring wells where they are, so that in the future you could maybe perhaps put in a larger production well. I think if we're going to go to the expense of putting in a large diameter well, generally they would become a new water supply. But I've seen large diameter wells also kind of put on hold for years and years, and they're just capped and maintained, in a safe manner, and then you can come back to them later. It's happened both ways.
In terms of what's happening to what's being proposed at this stage, these sites would be drilled and the drill hole would be capped with that locking cap that you mentioned. Yes, yeah, these are called test wells or monitoring wells. Yes, they would be capped. And then there would be a decision down the road once the information is gathered and the data is collected, whether to leave those in place to contribute to our ongoing knowledge of the groundwater situation in the town, or whether they will be removed. Does that answer your question, Ginny?
Yeah, I would say it'd likely be at least 1 year would be, no, there's no way. It would be at least 2 years before any water could flow from any of these wells into the water system, because of all the requirements that are needed for this.
And I just wanted to add that I want to make sure that it's understood these are monitoring and test wells. These are not wells that would be used for future water supply. It's not like we could pull the cap off of these and use them as a well for the town. This is to determine what's there. These are exploratory.
Yeah, a permanent production well is usually 12 to 18 inches in diameter, a much larger thing. And that's a whole different beast to put that in. That's down the road, way down the road.
Carlos?
Yeah, I guess my feeling is a little bit opposite, I think, of Don's, in the sense of that I think that second or this last site, even though it is a meadow and it's a wetland area, it's not prime wetland. There'd be less forested area impact, and it is maintained, mowed, and open on an annual basis, so that I would see that as, I'd have a lot less problem with that one if it were to be explored or long-term used than the Smith Page, just because that as the prime wetland would have a lot more forest access impact. And I guess I would see that kind of reversed. I'd see that as a more sensitive site, but I may be wrong on it. But based on what I've seen of the two sites, that would be my feeling on that.
Carlos, nothing is more prime to me than the actual river.
Yeah, no, that I agree. If there's any direct impact into the river, certainly, yeah, that would be, it is closer to the river itself. But I guess I see the main impact being the access to those sites and if they're maintained. But we do that on an annual basis with equipment to mow it and maintain it open, so.
Yeah,
Carlos, we don't have to create a road. It's mowed with very, very light equipment. It's there's no road that has to be brought in, because if you put a well there, you're going to have a maintenance road. You're going to have a maintenance road that's going to go in right by the river at Court Street, follow along there, go through over a gully into the meadow. So think of that. Think of you got to have access to it on a daily basis if it's a well.
I would just add that depending on where this is, and I'm not as familiar with the site as Dan is, because that's Dan's bailiwick. I'm more on the infrastructure part, but I will say we have plenty of instances where we have wells in wet meadows like this, and the only access is an access to that well, and that's not every day. So that well would pump to a remote or more remote pump station on higher ground, and that's what you would. The pump station is something you would go to every day at some point. The well itself, you do not need to go to, except very occasionally if you have to do something, monitoring wise, or it's time to redevelop that well. But I just want to correct that notion that once you have a well out in that meadow, it's something that the traffic will be going out to every day, because that wouldn't occur.
Would there be a building, though, of some sort?
And again, we haven't gone down the road of where this would be. There would need to be a building of some sort somewhere. And it's typically, if it's a wet meadow, and again, I haven't been out there, so I haven't seen it, but if it's a wet meadow, we don't want to put a building out in a wet meadow. We want it on, it has to be above higher ground, it has to be above the 100-year floodplain level. So have to see, what the lay of the land is and where it could go. But the object would be to, I've done wells in floodplains before, where the well is in a floodplain, the well head itself is raised up above the 100-year floodplain, and then the pump station itself can be hundreds up to maybe 1,000 feet away from that. It doesn't need to be right there at the wellhead.
Trevor, were you next? I'm not.
Yeah, I'm honestly trying to sort of like get this back into a scope that we can work with here, because I feel like we're sort of going off in a lot of different directions. And I'm sort of harking back to what Dawn said a while ago, where we're sort of taking this step by step. And right now we're really talking about exploration here, which, and it's good that we're thinking ahead, to what could potentially be there. But again, I feel like there's a lot of steps in the middle between these exploration drillings that we're talking about here and ultimately what might get developed down the road as well, which might have to come before us again anyway, and it has to go through a number of hoops. So I'm trying to take a bite out of this. I'm looking at, again, just the language of the deeds and trying to interpret whether something like this would fall in, and whether we could start to make motions on some of these based purely on that. So just looking at the one on the screen right here, I know Carlos was saying that this might be a bit better to do, but I'm not quite sure the language of the white deed would really be too favorable for it. I just want to pull that up. No hunting or motorized public access. Town can use motorized equipment as necessary to mow or maintain. So there's no motorized public access, but the town can use motorized equipment as necessary to mow or maintain. But whether or not that means we can use motorized equipment for this purpose, I think is the question that we need to ask, right? And I feel like we could sort of start taking a look at each of these parcels and going through that very specific language, like, all right, does this fit the spirit of the deed? The SG1, I know, really like sets off red flags for me, and I think that folks will definitely want to get in touch with Dredd and, again, forgetting his name, Eric Feldbaum, because that should absolutely be the first step in the process, looking into that property. But anyway, I'm sort of rambling too, but I feel like we really need to sort of bring it back down to, like, let's interpret the language of the deeds here and whether this very specific action fits with those deeds. And if so, we can make motions moving that along. If we want to add some considerations for the different, conservation elements to it, I think that would be fair too. But I think just in the sake of moving through a process here, that might be the way we want to go.
I think you got a good point, Trevor. And in actually the wording of the deeds that Kristen has suggested, it talks just about whether it fits the deed or not. And starting at this one that's still in front of us, I think it does. I think, to my mind, we could say, I've lost it now, that we've reviewed the proposal and feel the activity is in compliance with the terms of the deed as proposed. I think it is for this one, but I will make that motion just to move things along. If nobody seconds it, that's fine. We keep muddling along.
And so for Riverbend, or sorry, Tara. Yeah, you call it Riverbend here. Are you talking about White's Meadow or the one on the Riverbend parcel?
This particular, I guess White's Meadow and...
There's two in this one.
Yeah, there are two things. Well, I thought both deeds were okay. I was moving approval for groundwater development in zone SG4. How about that? Which covers both.
And
I
both
think
of
you
those-
have to do it by parcel, Bill,
Yep,
by deed.
by deed.
by deed.
And there's
Yeah.
two separate deeds. So it has to be two separate.
Bill's muted.
You want to make another motion, Bill?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read the deed off my phone while I mean the motion off while I'm looking at the screen. Okay, let's take the white one first, and I'll make the motion that lost the wording. We received the proposal and feel the activities in compliance with the terms of the deed as proposed for the white property.
I'll second that.
Yeah, Drew recused himself. So, Trevor, as vice chair, do you want to take over, like, I don't know, facilitating the votes?
Sure.
Okay. But I did hear a second.
So, are there any more? Okay, so let's work on the white one. That sounds good. And there's been a motion put forth and seconded by Sally. Are there any more comments before we move?
So my comment would just be going back to the point that you were making, Trevor, which picked up on an earlier point, which is we're just talking now about the exploration. We're not talking about ultimate wells. We're just talking about the exploration. And should there be a proposal for developing one of these explorations into an ultimate well, it would need to come back to us and or other entities in town. Is that correct?
That's how I understand it.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
So,
are we ready for a vote?
I would like to. This is the one that's giving me trouble, I think, again, because it says no motorized public access. So that's what's sticking to me, and I'm wondering how others are interpreting that.
Yeah. So my interpretation is general public access, not town access. So this is not the general public; it is the town. Wanting to do something to benefit the town. So that's how I see it as different than public access. It sort of fits in the second part of it, but it doesn't specifically say, but we're not talking about motorized access for maintaining the site. We're talking about motorized access for another public reason. So it's not entirely obvious, but to me, it doesn't fit either one of those categories that's specified in the deed.
All right, thanks.
My interpretation is similar to Sally's.
Don, you have your hand up?
Yeah, my interpretation is very specific what the access is for the town, which is to mow and maintain the field. So it gave specific language. It didn't say municipal access, period. It said for a specific reason.
Yeah.
So it laid out the only reasons why motorized access is allowed. That's my interpretation. We're all lawyers tonight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is a sticky one. And Don, I think I see what you're saying, but for me, that sentence is broken up. So the town of Exeter can use motorized equipment as is necessary to mow and maintain the property herein above conveyed, period. And then it talks about maintaining it as a wet meadow. So I think where I lean a little more towards Sally's interpretation is the idea of just maintaining the property. And in this case, it would be for a public use. I'm also not a lawyer, so then
it does raise the question then of how would we address this if there were a question? Kristen, maybe you can help. If there were a question about whether or not this would violate the deed, how would we determine that? I mean, we're interpreting it, but as Allison says, we're not lawyers. So would it be a question of going back to the original people or their...
does town legal counsel weigh in on these? I will say I do always feel slightly uncomfortable interpreting deeds. Is this I imagine, the town has legal counsel. Do they ever weigh in on these?
Not typically, but you could, I suppose you could consult legal counsel on your interpretation.
Could we put a rider in the amendment that says that we approve it pending council's approval of the interpretation of the deed of that sentence? We rephrase the motion to say that. Would it help?
I guess if there is conflict among you in interpretation, maybe that would be a solution.
Okay.
But you do have the authority to interpret these deeds through RSA 36A. And so, I would hate to see us running to legal counsel every time there's a question of whether something complies, I guess. If this is raised to the threshold that there's conflict among the board and you cannot come to consensus, then maybe legal counsel should be consulted.
But somebody could raise the question and challenge us in court. Somebody could sue and say, I don't agree with your interpretation, and we could go to court on it that way. Isn't that right? So we can...
I would think yes, but as Kristen just mentioned too, we have authority through the statute to interpret these deeds.
Right, but somebody could challenge our interpretation. At any rate,
they could challenge anyone's interpretation, right?
True.
And there are certain parcels where I think maybe it would make more sense. That some deeds have what's called a reversionary clause, where if it's interpreted that you're acting not in compliance with the deed, ownership reverts back to the original owner. White's Meadow does not have that clause, and I have to look at the table again that I put together. There was one, I believe it was the Cat's property.
It was Exeter Falls.
Exeter Falls, yeah. So, but this property does not have such a clause.
So I have a minor request, and that is, can we stop screen share just because I feel like we're in discussion mode about the deed now, not the parcel itself, and it just helps to see other faces. Thank you.
So we have a motion now, but also a discussion of a contingency to the motion?
No, I would withdraw that after Kristen's comment.
You withdraw the contingency? Okay, so...
Straight, that first motion for the, for the White Meadow.
And the motion is that we've reviewed it and we feel that it does comply.
Just what Kristen said.
Uh-huh.
Are there some conditions that you could put around it that would help Don's concerns, like seasonality? So this would just be winter the initial exploratory drilling would occur in the winter, or is there something along those lines that would help your concern, Don?
Yeah, that's going to kind of complicate things. See, the commission should understand that when I was chair of the commission many of those years ago, I'm the one that sat down with Willie when he deeded the property to the town. And he had very, real concerns about what was going to happen to that property. And again, he's not around. I'm only talking to you about my recollection of the meetings we had with him, that, if he were to think about it today, that there would be potentially of developing a well or a well site or any kind of a development there of any sort, it would really, you had to know Willie, it wouldn't go well with him. This is not what his intent was. His intent was to leave it as a natural meadow. But again, you got to go by the deed, what the language of the deed is. So I think to put contingencies in, it's, you're only going to do it during the winter or the dry period. I think that complicates it, overcomplicates it. But again, I'm just, a lot of where I'm coming from, a lot of it is my sensitivity to the area, number one, and two, having, worked with Willie to preserve this very important piece of property.
Well, he does have relatives left that would.
Yeah, Bruce. Yeah,
Bruce is very interested in that piece.
Who keep a watch on the area.
Okay.
All right. So if there's no other comments, there's a current motion and a second. And again, the motion is we have reviewed this proposal and feel the activity is in compliance with the terms of the deed as proposed. So, Sally, would you like to call the roll?
Yes.
Is everyone ready for a vote here?
Are we ready? I'll start with you, Trevor.
I vote nay.
Nay. Dave Short?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Bill Campbell?
Yes.
Carlos?
Aye.
Linda? I'm sorry, what did you vote?
Yes.
Yes. Allison?
Yes.
And Nick voting?
Yes.
Nick? Yes. Okay, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I vote, so we have 6 yes and 1 no. Passes.
All right.
All right.
Move right along.
And the other piece that's connected, Kristen, is
SG4.
Is the which Riverbend? Or
Yes.
okay, we reviewed the proposal and let's the same motion for the Riverbend, just so we move along a little bit.
It's not the same deed, though. Are there any comments?
There isn't, right.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time unmuting and scrolling. So Riverbend, it was deeded to the town as conservation land. It's designated for use as conservation land in open area and not for residential or commercial use. And that was really the only terms that I keyed in on.
Yep.
I had less trouble with this one than White.
Yep, I second your motion, Bill. This is neither residential nor commercial.
Any further comments? Okay, Sally.
So we'll go in the same order as before. Trevor?
Yay.
Dave Short?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
And Nick?
Yes.
So that's 7 to 0 passes.
Now going back up north from there, their main concern is with Riverwoods, which we have nothing to do with, I guess. Because do we hold I don't know. The easement's held by, or the conservation thing is held by SELT, isn't that right?
Correct.
So,
and it sounds like they asked to table the stone parcel. So I don't think you need to take action on any of the wells, proposed exploration wells on that sheet.
Then we go to cats next then?
Yep, sounds good. So this is one of the tough ones, right?
Right. So Cats was deeded. Oh, am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay. Cats was deeded, or Cats or Exeter Falls was deeded to the to the town for conservation purposes pursuant to RSA 36A. If residential, industrial, or commercial activity, I hyper shortened this, sorry, doesn't quite make sense. But if the town were to conduct residential, industrial, or commercial activities, ownership shall revert. And so my comment on this was it would be helpful to understand, I tried to determine whether water development is considered industrial. It doesn't feel like an industrial development to me. But so I wondered if there were other examples in other communities where it's kind of been categorized as a use.
I don't know if that's a question to me. I'm not aware of water being considered. I mean, we refer to us as the water industry, that we're developing water supplies and the infrastructure to bring drinking water to people. But and it's not my role to interpret, but when I heard that, my interpretation of industry there is not a pump station with a water well. And I've never heard it called that in any other community, but I haven't really pursued that, Kristen, as finding out. I mean, it's never come up before as whether you would term that an industrial use, but my interpretation would be it is not industrial or commercial. It's municipal water supply.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I kind of was thinking like essential services or something along those lines, but I really wasn't sure how other communities may have addressed that.
And isn't this the one where we discussed getting a read from Dredd about this?
No, that's the other side.
What's the other one? Okay.
Smith Page.
Yeah, okay.
I have trouble with this, but Kristen, maybe you can help, because I would say no because of the sensitivity of the environmental concerns, and particularly that we're next to or working next to a prime wetland. But that doesn't have to do with the deed, does it? I mean, technically, it sounds like the deed doesn't prevent them going in. But I certainly have a lot of objections on this one and the next one about them going in.
Well, so I guess for that, I would recommend you look at the purposes of the conveyance. And so let's see if I can.
Okay.
Maintained in perpetuity as open space without them hunting or trapping.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering, what was that phrase again that you quoted? I'm trying to scroll too, and it doesn't work.
The one about
what's the restrictions?
So it shall be maintained in perpetuity as open space without there being conducted thereon any residential, industrial, or commercial activities. There shall be no hunting or trapping on the property. If grantee or successors or assigns at any time conduct any residential, industrial, or commercial activities on the property, or convey the whole or any portion of the property to any other entity, then title to the whole of the property shall revert to the grantor or its successors. And it continues on, but I don't know if the rest is helpful.
would somebody help me maybe with wording here? But I would go for the second line of our suggested motions, that we review this proposal and recommend that the activity is not in compliance with the terms of the deed as noted, as that is private. The area is supposed to be just for environmental purposes, or it violate condition about commercial and industrial.
I see more it's the open space part of it that gets me, not the industrial commercial, because the follow-up to what you said, Kristen, that it's if we were to cede rights to it to some other entity, in this case it would be to the town of Exeter for water, then the ownership would revert. So I have some questions about this one, given the language of the deed.
So, Sally, I'm sorry, just to clarify. Mm-hmm. So this was granted to the town of Exeter.
Okay.
So
could you read that deed language again?
Yes. If grantee or its successors or assigns at any time should conduct any residential, industrial, or commercial activities on the property, or convey the whole or any portion of the property to any other entity, then the title of the whole shall revert. So it is granted to the town of Exeter. I don't think that a different department within the town of Exeter is conveying it to another entity. That's my quick thought.
That clarifies.
Yeah. So for those of you following along the packets, it's the bottom of page 13, top of page 14. This one doesn't, it makes me a little nervous just because of it's the reverting clause, but at the same time, I don't feel that there's really industrial activities being in the spirit of the deed. I don't feel like an exploration drill for a well and a one and done is necessarily an industrial activities as in like the property is being turned into something that'll be continuously used for industrial activity. Like after that drilling, it's still open space, and even with the wellhead, it's still being conserved as open space. So this one doesn't strike me as problematic. I would be interested to hear, though, if there were other communities in which this was considered an industrial activity.
Or if it wasn't,
If it wasn't, right. I could not find any specifically that identified it in any class of kind of land use, really. It was just always, like Mike said, a municipal supply, municipal water use. We have developed plenty of wells in conservation parcels, but I don't recall ever having one of the reversion clauses.
I haven't been out there in years, but I remember when we got it, there was about a 10-foot right-of-way to get in there to that property. Is that the only access now? Off the cul-de-sac and the development? Is there any other way to get into it?
I believe that's true. I mean, there is, I don't know if you can go up the power line or not. The power line has a basically ATV graphic up and down it, so there is a trail, but I was thinking we'd come off that cul-de-sac.
Well, I can see there might be a few neighbors that wouldn't like to see that happen, but that's not our concern, I guess. But 10 feet hardly allows you to get the tractor in. Seems to me.
Right, but that's all we need, really. We can just sneak in there.
But then if you got it and you had it, trucks and things going in that 10-foot right away. I don't know.
Yeah, if it got to the point where there was a production well, then you need bigger than 10 feet. For the exploration process,
I don't think you're going to get it off the other people next door. But
Julie, I see your hand.
Yes, for what it's worth, this kind of infrastructure is defined in our zoning ordinance as an essential service as opposed to industrial.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you.
That's good.
And I would just add, I mean, this came up before, and so I've asked around, and I've never heard of water supply infrastructure being referred to as an industrial use. That's all I can say is I've been doing it for about 40 years now, and I've never heard water referred to as industrial.
Yeah, and so the purpose of my comment was not to, was it would be helpful to know, and I think, I think, Dan, you may have mentioned it, whether this activity has occurred on conservation land that had restrictions against industrial, commercial, residential use, and it sounds like there was. So, you know.
Well, I could not find language that specifically addressed the. They never classified it as anything like commercial or industrial. All the conservation easements that I've worked with and developed wells on didn't have those types of restrictions or reversion clauses. I've never worked on a site with a reversion clause. I'm not a lawyer either.
I'll let somebody else take a shot at a motion. I've done my work for tonight.
Americans waste over $21 billion by overpaying on cars.
Are there any other comments?
No. Zebra compares them all. It shows you can actually see them. Compare car insurance for free at zebra.com.
Seeing some shaking heads. Would someone like to take a stab at a motion?
So I will move that we've reviewed the request and recommend that the activity is in compliance with the conditions, with the terms of the deeds as noted.
I'll second.
All right. Sally?
Trevor?
Yay.
Dave?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Jill?
No.
Carlos?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
So that one passes 6-1.
All right, making some progress, moving right along. So, shall we move over to
Smith Page?
Yeah.
Yeah, Smith and Page, SG1.
But that, Kristen, we could take those together, or do we do this separately also?
I guess it's up to you. They're fairly similar in that they both, I think they both have that bar of the Land Water Conservation Fund.
The Smith property is on Drinkwater? Or
yes.
Yeah. So to access the Katz property, not Kate, Page property, you have to go through the Smith property. Is that right?
Oh, sorry. No, Page is the one closest to Drinkwater, and then the more interior one is Smith.
Okay, so the only way to get to Smith is through Page. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we could do them together. They've got that same restriction in there.
We're not drilling on Page at all. We're just drilling on Smith.
It's just Smith.
We do have to do the tree work on Page to have access.
Yeah.
So Smith, which is where the drill sites are, was granted to the town to be managed and controlled by the Conservation Commission. Page, which is the access from Drinkwater, was granted to the Conservation Commission. They both have a statement that it cannot be converted to a use other than outdoor recreation without written approval from the Secretary of Interior. And then Eric Feldbaum with DRED has been our reporting point of contact.
And I'll just make a quick clarification that DRED is now Dancer, Department of Natural and Cultural Resources.
Thank you.
It's now what, Chris or Allison?
So, DRED, the State Department of Resources and Economic Development, went through a reorganization maybe a year or two ago, and is no longer called DRED. They're now called the Department of, I always forget Dancer, so Department of Natural and Cultural Resources.
Okay, thanks.
So I'll speak up on this one. I'm relatively familiar with the LWCF and their regulations. I think it's absolutely vital that we go and get kind of Eric's opinion on the matter. One thing I did want to mention, and I think it's worth thinking about, is that if it is deemed as a viable well site, DRED or Dancer might come back and say, if you are going to be doing this type of project on this site, we'll allow it, but you're going to have to substitute out some sort of other recreational property of equal or fair market value, which I think actually the rec department had to deal with recently when they were proposing their complex last year. So something to consider, just to think about.
Okay.
I am curious. I know we talked about access kind of being challenging near the fire pond. There is a parcel to the south of that has a straight shot, basically a road that dead ends at the loop trail that's out there. And I wondered if there was any communication with that abutter to the south.
There has been no communication, though.
Okay.
But I'm familiar with the parcel. I know where it is. But no, because it's a town-owned property we're trying to access, we thought it made sense to try to stick on the town-owned access.
Understood.
I think that's a bigger problem. So Pfizer and the first,
Is that the access that also has vehicular or motorized use on it? So four-wheelers? So there's a fairly major four-wheeler track that's used out there. And is that what you're talking about, Kristen? Is that off the same property?
No, that is a property, one of the long, narrow properties, like 3 or 4 to the north, if we're talking about the same one. Okay. This is the one that has on Drinkwater Road, you can see their field just south of the house.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that'd be different then. Yeah.
Yeah, that field dead ends. It has a road, a driveway, or I don't know if it's a driveway, but it's an open area that dead ends at the trail.
Okay. Yeah, because I know there is a property, but I'm not sure which one of those on Drinkwater then that does have access for four-wheeled vehicles. It gets used quite a bit, but it would be through private property.
Any other comments? Again, does anyone want to take a stab at a motion?
So I'll make a motion that we've reviewed the proposal and recommend that we consult with Dancer in terms of their interpretation. Before approving.
One further comment, and I apologize, I tuned out of the very last bit of conversation because I was attending to children, but I heard talk of different access points, but we did discuss, if this is in compliance with the deed, the potential for best practices for accessing to avoid transmission of invasive species. So do we want to add a piece about following best practices?
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. So as the proposer, I would accept that addition. So the proposal would be, we've reviewed this proposal and recommend that we get feedback from Dancer, number one, and number two, that best practices be followed with regard to dealing with invasive species and minimizing the impact of invasive species as access proceeds. Too wordy, but whatever.
I'll second.
Any other comments?
So just for clarification, should Dancer find this use is in compliance? Are you requesting if they approve it, you're okay with it moving forward, correct?
That would be my what my intention was in the proposal.
One more point of clarification is that, would you like us to contact Dancer, or would you like that done through the Conservation Commission, through Kristen somehow, or what have you?
Kristen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm fine. Or Matt, perhaps you and I could do it together.
Yep, perfectly.
If they have questions on process or timing.
Absolutely. Yep.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Any other points of clarification before we take a vote? Okay.
Ready? I'll go in the same order as before. Trevor?
Yay.
Dave Short?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill? Bill? Are you still with us, Bill? You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah.
Carlos?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
And Nick?
Yes.
So that one passes 7-0. And Kristen and Matt will follow up with Dancer.
Now, I voted because I think with that motion, it's compliant with the deed. I still have a great concern about a couple of these sites with regard to the neighborhood they're in, and putting a something like that. It's not going to be great publicity for the Conservation Commission. But we'll take that up, I guess, after we get around to after they've done their drilling.
Yep.
Thanks, Bill. All right. Is that the last? That's the last site, correct?
On that part, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to cede my chair duties back to Drew.
Thank you, Trevor. Well done.
Great job.
This is a challenging project. There's a lot going into it. So thanks, everyone. Dan, Matt, Mike, do you have any other comments?
No, not unless anyone has any more questions for us. This was great. Thank you all for the good discussion. Gives us a lot to think about as we go out there. This is my first time ever really being part of a meeting like this. To hear all this about deeds has been very informational for me. So thank you all. So unless you have any questions for us, I think we're all set.
I would just ask you provide Kristen a heads up about when access will be, if this could impact trail access temporarily, and I think we'd want to post some information. So just please, before, if any of this does proceed, please just give us a heads up.
We'll give several weeks notice by the time I can schedule a rig.
I also wonder if it would be possible, especially the Smith Page and Katz as well, those two Exeter Falls, those two parcels do have very narrow entrances, and so it might be helpful to coordinate or contact the abutters so that they're aware that this has gone through this process and what the plan is. I know Smith Page, for example, the abutter to the north, the neighborhood in general is very concerned over people even using the trail. So, so in light of not tarnishing the Conservation Commission's name publicly, I think it would really go a long way if there was some communication with them.
Initiated by us or the Conservation Commission?
I think it would make sense to come from the town, so from Public Works, as it is their project, but just detailing, a letter saying on this, time frame we plan on being out there. This has been reviewed and vetted by the Conservation Commission and compliant with the terms of the deeds.
And I will prepare a brief letter describing the best management practices with regard to the invasive species, and I guess I'll submit that to Kristen. Is that acceptable? I'll work on that right away.
Thanks.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, thank you very much. I only have one other thing that has nothing to do with this. I just want to say to Allison that I live in Kentucky, and Lisa, your aunt, I assume, is one of my best friends.
Is it Lisa Eberhard, I assume?
Lisa Eberhard.
Yeah, no relation, if you can believe it, that I'm aware of at least.
Because she has a brother, Bobby, who lives on the seacoast, who has a daughter named Allison. So I thought I just put two and two together.
I don't know that, Allison. I'll have to meet that other Allison Eberhard.
I even texted my wife while I was sitting here saying, "Does Lisa have a?" And she said, "Yes." So I thought I was good. So sorry about that.
No problem.
But thank you very much for your time and consideration, and we'll follow through.
Yep.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thanks.
Yep.
All right, we need a stretch break. Spin around. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the committee reports, which is after the deeds. There's Kristen's handy dandy dashboard in your packet. Kristen, do you want to take this? You're muted currently.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. I was just looking to see if there was anything key to highlight. We did have a cleanup day organized by Sally out at Rain's Barn. Several folks showed up, which was wonderful. We got quite a bit of the barn tidied up. Some of the historic items organized in a nice fashion. And so we are poised and ready to have an event out there when we deem it safe. That same day, Carlos was out at Rains doing some additional knotweed removal, right? He's been working hard to address some knotweed. He and Nick initially started, was that in the fall or spring? I can't remember. The Riverwoods conservation easement, I was hoping we would have it now, but they're in the final step of revising the plans to include the gas line easement in the proper location. And so we're waiting on the surveyed plans for that, but they anticipate those being completed this month. So hopefully we'll be able to move that on to the select board with the Conservation Commission's recommendation. You've already voted on that. Hopefully January or late December, which would be nice to have that completed. Trying to think what else. I mean, I'm happy to elaborate on anything else that you see in there if you'd like.
Any comments? And other activities or any other property management issues folks have seen? It is hunting. Is it still hunting season? What's the status of hunting season?
Yeah, till well, no, it stopped for shooting, but archery, I think, goes to the 12th, which is Saturday.
So still advisable to wear orange.
Oh,
the rifle season is over? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Not everybody follows the guidelines.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can do dual duty and have everybody wear orange masks. That would be the way to do it.
Yep.
Okay. Any other trail updates we want to talk about tonight? No?
I don't think so.
It's wet now. After being dry for so long, our trails are wet again. And they're still getting a lot of use. So hopefully
Absolutely.
They're now
lots of cars out there
getting frozen up nice and good. And it's probably what now, fat bike season, Dave? So it'll be interesting.
It's getting close. Yeah. So yeah, hopefully it doesn't get too wet, because with the amount of use we're getting on the trails, that would be pretty detrimental. So, but we'll keep an eye on that.
Oh, Bill, you and Carlos did work at Allen Street.
We did. We're not done quite, though.
You want to share?
Well, we got a trail about halfway around the property, and then ran into quite a lot of invasives and just brush. So we didn't come. We weren't quite sure where we wanted to bring the trail down. We've got to go out again. The invasives at what I would say was at the east end of the property are quite thick.
But it is a pretty piece of property. It's got a nice edge area along the river.
Yeah.
And the trail goes along that. And that has some nice large trees without invasives, actually amazingly invasive free. It's that edge that has a lot of houses next to it. And then we ran into some questions also about the corner where some material is getting pushed back and potentially onto the property. So we need to go back and check that corner for where the markers should be.
All right, well, thanks for that continued effort out there. That's awesome. Are there any other outreach? We have family winter programming with Parks and Rec, considering a winter solstice celebration. Is there any?
So I had a question about the winter solstice celebration. Wanted to get feedback from the commission. So this is something we did last year, and it was great. It was fun. It was festive. People had a good time. This year's we're in a different place, and the planning group for that last year was Kristen and me and Ginny, and we had talked about doing it again, but I wanted to discuss whether we should proceed given where we are with COVID. And it would be an outdoor thing, but nonetheless, I have some hesitation and concerns because we're spiking. So what is your sense? We do have, and Nick had some ideas about things we could do later in the winter. Snowshoeing, of course, and a sled event. If and when things get back to normal, and we could do what we did last year for the solstice event was we had a lantern walk and a bonfire and hot chocolate, and we could do a bonfire again at any time, sort of a pop-up event, because we have we'll get the resources to do that. We just need cinder blocks and pallets to do it. It was quite nice last year. So what are your thoughts? Should we proceed with this?
Hand up.
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Drew?
Ginny, do you want to comment?
Well, thinking back to what Kristen had to go through for what we were doing for Skywatch and diagramming, and I just don't think it's possible to do that with this event. The Skywatch, you were sedentary. I mean, not sedentary, but you were stationary. This is not. And to abide by any guidelines, I think would be difficult to submit a plan or a map, or I think we should put it on hold.
That's my inclination too, because of where we are, but I didn't want to proceed without getting feedback from the group.
I would just ask Sally, is it possible to do some sort of put together some sort of grab and go kit where people could do it themselves, that we could work together to put something into the hands of families that they could then go and, take some direction, or I don't know, just trying to think creatively.
Yep. I mean, I suppose we could, but once you put it out there, you have the question about the number of people who would be there. And that would be my concern. If it's an organized event.
I guess what I'm saying is we could not tie it to a specific date. We could just, we could say, hey, the Exeter Conservation Commission is sponsoring X, Y, and Z. If you're interested, stop by to pick up this at Town Hall or Rains Farm or whatever it might be. And we can be explicitly clear, participate on your own. Just a creative thought.
Yep. Or we could, but what would we say? What would the communication be? I guess that would be my question, because people can go at any time. So what we want to do is elevate we want this to be one of the properties that people think of first. For doing something outdoors, it's beautiful, and you can do all sorts of things. You can go on the trails, you can walk the fields when it's not mowing season, you can go to the cemetery, you can take a look at the barn. So I'd like to, our goal is to enhance that as we move forward. And definitely want to do something more in the winter, depending on what happens with the coronavirus.
I'm happy to continue the conversation. I don't want to hog up everyone's time, but I think we could come up with some creative kind of.
Yeah. So why don't we touch base? And Ben Anderson, who's on the Rains Stewardship Committee, is always interested in having events at Rains. It's his right across the street from him, and he's very helpful in.
Nick, does the rec department sort of have a blanket permission to hold events? No, I mean, like when you did the trail with the kids' trail walk, did you have to have a formal application for that? Do you know?
So I know that David with Parks and Rec would ask a litany of questions to kind of certify that participants were, taking all the necessary precautions to participate in the programs. I think Greg, Melissa, the team over there, they do a great job of kind of protecting themselves and the town. And I would assume that if we were to do something like that, we would kind of adopt whatever policies they have in place and practices they have in place.
And they were required. They present all of their programming to the select board for.
They do, each individual one. So it isn't, you know how to do it and you go ahead and do it. Yeah.
I mean, I think I don't know, Julie, maybe you know better than I do, but I think they have to present their fall programming, their, winter programming to the select board for review and approval.
We're doing that right now because of the situation we're in with the state of emergency. Otherwise, the Parks and Rec would fill out their own application and presumably pass it. So this is very different. That's why everything's coming to the select board right now. The other thing now has just dropped out of my mind. To maybe first contact our health officer, James Murray, even before you go to Parks and Rec, just to give him an idea. He's right on top of what's happening and what your choices are, what his expectations would be for an outdoor event like that.
Well, I was thinking last year we talked about having the barn open for hot chocolate for when they were out sledding or, and I thought, well, we could still do that except that not have anybody in the barn per se, that we could put the table in the doorway and just serve from there. But so maybe get a blanket idea from James, or is that his tool?
Yep.
But that would.
All right. Well, it sounds. If you guys want to check in with him first, and then, to me, it sounds pretty challenging to pull off. But if you want to explore it, I think that would be okay with me personally. I don't know that we need anything from the commission to.
I don't think
do it. So if you guys can pull it off and you're excited about it, that would be awesome. But it sounds pretty challenging to me, given everything.
Yeah, well, certainly. The solstice is less than 2 weeks away. So,
yeah.
But there are plenty of winter activities that we could consider. That, as Nick suggests, we can be creative about it. So I'd like to continue that conversation.
Yeah, for the last 2 years, I've been involved with this full moon snowshoe at the golf course, and that's been a fun event. So I don't anticipate us doing it this year, but I don't know. Unless otherwise, we could talk about it in January and look at dates.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like we're quite ready for that one.
Yep.
But that's my sense at the moment. In terms of other outreach events, I know Ben Anderson and the Word Barn, they just hosted another natural or environmental ed event focused on owls, and they were generously going to donate some of the proceeds from that event to the commission. So I want to thank the word barn and Ben for his continued support. I don't know if you received anything about that, Kristen.
I haven't, other than I think they sold out pretty quickly for that owl prowl.
The owl prowl, that was it.
Yeah. And I believe they added, I was just trying to look it up real quick. I believe they added an additional day for it.
On Saturday, they were going to, but that was the day of the heavy rain, so I don't know if they actually.
No, they did add. It wasn't last Saturday. It's in another Saturday or two. So folks.
Oh, it wasn't the next day. Oh. Okay.
Yeah, it's another Saturday. It might be.
Yeah, it's December 19th.
The 19th. So not this upcoming Saturday, the following one. There's another event. So that's excellent. Okay, any more outreach events? I wish we could do more, but this just is not the year, so. Was there someone else? Oh, blip, okay. What's next? Are we on to the minutes? We have 2 sets of minutes. We had a revised section of the October minutes regarding our discussions, conceptual discussions. Did anyone, I know both Trevor and I kind of brought this up last time. Did you have a minute to read it, Trevor?
Yeah, I just want to say kudos to Daniel, our recording secretary, for really filling those out. I know they, I said last month that they looked like they were missing quite a bit of detail, and I think he really filled that out really well. So I think those look great.
I will. I'll motion. I agree with you, and I'll motion that we move to approve the October minutes as amended.
I'd second that.
Ready for a vote? Trevor?
Aye.
Dave?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill? Is Bill?
You're muted.
I could read his lips. Allison?
Yes.
And Drew, you're voting on this one.
Yes.
Okay, that passes.
I'll make a motion, we approve the minutes of November 10th.
Second.
I have one edit. I think we can remove Daryl Brown, the select board alternate liaison. We don't need to mark him absent. He's not expected to be at this meeting, so I would just ask that he gets scratched.
Okay.
But Allison, you are absent, so you're in there. Sorry.
I get the black mark.
Yeah.
Ready for a vote?
Yeah, because I was absent, I will abstain from this vote.
Okay. Drew?
Yes.
Trevor?
Aye.
Dave?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Aye.
Skip, Allison. Nick? Shall you vote Nick as standing in for Allison?
Yes.
Okay, that passes.
Okay. Is there any other business or correspondence this month?
No correspondence.
Would anyone like to raise any other business?
I would just like to say thank you all for your diligent and very hard work. I really appreciate all that goes into your efforts. And I want to wish you happy holidays, happy and safe holidays.
Thank you. You too. And Happy New Year. Here's looking to 2021. Better times ahead.
There you go.
Yeah, I would say it's been a tough year, obviously, and I think we've managed well on the commission. Did we lose 1 or 2 meetings through at the beginning? Maybe 2 meetings. I think we lost March and April, and then
we lost one because Zoom got what did it bombed? Is that what they call it?
Or whatever. Yeah. So we were short a few meetings, but we've been very productive. So I want to thank everyone for all their work this challenging year, and We have no holiday party at Bill's house. I'm missing that this year.
I'm missing it too.
Maybe we can have a spring fling.
We're not even having relatives over. We're pretty isolated.
I know. We're lonely.
But somebody promised that we'd all be vaccinated pretty soon.
Yeah.
We're almost through the virus, according to one man.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
We'll see.
All right. Forget the political stuff.
And Drew, you've done a great job using the new means for having our meetings and keeping them flowing. So thanks.
Absolutely. It's tough. It's challenging. So.
Yeah, I teach with it, and I know it's challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging. I have two screens, so if you see me looking at it, I'm not dazing off at the distance. I'm looking at another screen.
Yeah, you try to keep multiple things running at once.
Two things.
I can't figure out how to look at the packet and look at the screen at the same time. So.
But yeah, no, there are some benefits to the screen sharing and all of this that, there's definitely some good things we're figuring out. So, we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has been great, and I hope everyone has a great holidays.
Thank you.
And we'll reconvene. We have a new member. Did we mention that in the meeting? I think we mentioned it before the meeting. So we'll have a new member in the new year. So that we have a full board. I'm thankful for that, and everyone's hard work.
Wait, who's our new member? I've forgotten.
Connor Madison.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He's a friend of Lindsay's.
Oh yeah, he's a friend of mine too. That's great.
So is he going to be an alternate? He's going to be an alternate, taking Lindsay's place. Mm-hmm. Great.
I think he'd be very good.
Great.
So we'll get him on board, onboarded in the next month, and he'll be ready to go.
Great.
So, all right.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 12th, January 12th, 2021.
Yeah.
And the submission deadline is a little early this year because of the holidays, so it's by the end of the year. So please if you're listening right now, I don't know why you would be, but get your things in sooner than later to Kristen. All right, and I will make a motion to adjourn with that.
Second. And I think we decided last time we needed to vote on this, right?
Yeah, we did.
Quickly.
Drew? It's in my brain now.
Drew?
Yes.
Trevor?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Sally votes yes. Bill?
Yes.
Carlos?
Yes.
Allison?
Yes.
That's it.
Everyone be well and be safe.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.